Hello, everybody. Today is a special day here for us at the Centro de Informática, right? Because Fernando, in the morning, we had a talk by Fernando Castor. And now in the afternoon, I'm very glad to introduce you Emitzá Guzmán, who is my former colleague, but also we are friends. And she works at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, and her research focuses on human factors in software engineering. And today she's here to talk to us about ethics and software. Emitzá, thank you very much for joining us here. And yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here today about to speak to you about ethics in software. So I'm going to be presenting a lot of results. I don't have that much methodology information, but if you would like to hear more about methods, please just ask either during the presentation or afterwards. I'm happy with both formats, right? So today I'll be presenting work that we did together with Anna Fisher, Lauren Olsen, and Tom Humbert, who are PhD students in human factors at the Vrije Universiteit, and some of our master thesis students. So what comes to mind when you think about software?
AI.
AI, yeah. What?
We are dependent on software.
Dependency, yeah. That's a good one. Who has something else?
Books.
Bugs, yeah. Any other one? Which one? Functionality, yeah.
Controlling everything in society.
Controlling everything in society, right? Yes. Which one?
Like everything that we do nowadays has software.
Okay, so pervasiveness in some way?
I know what this,
Yeah. Okay.
but a bus has software, medical device has software, the TV has software.
You beat me to what I was going to say. Okay, so maybe you're thinking about the code that you were just making before you came to this meeting, right? Or the bug that you're trying to solve. Or maybe you're thinking about the software that allows us to go to the moon. So we were there, not us personally, but some of our species some weeks ago. Or maybe you're thinking about the software that allows us to make medical diagnoses about difficult illnesses. Or maybe you're thinking about the software that has been running Wall Street since the 80s. Or you're thinking about your new friend, ChatGPT, who you ask all your friends questions or consultations. Or you're thinking about the software that allows you to connect with your friends and family. Or you're thinking about the software that just recommend you your favorite movie or series on your streaming service. Or the one that recommended you your partner, favorite or unfavorite. So it's very tempting to think about software as this powerful, magical flying horse that drives technical innovation and allows us to live our best lives. But software also has its dark side. And there's already some of you that have hinted about this. So software is biased, it's surveillant, it's detrimental to mental health, it engineers human behavior, and it has a negative impact on the environment. And I think most of you have heard a lot about this, right? Because it's widely reported on the media and also on research articles. So we have different sites that are telling us the same story. So how did we get there? So in general, there's a lack of systematic ethical consideration when developing software, right? And again, it's not just me saying that, but also researchers that are saying this is how we got there. And even if ethics is kind of a new hypey word, right? Similar as low-rise genes, it's been there for a while, right? And just got trendy again very recently. So the first time that the word ethics was named in the context with software technology or computer ethics was already in 1985. So that's 40 years ago. James Moore, for the first time, said okay, we need to think about ethics when we're developing computer programs, right? And how he defined ethics in terms of with computer technology was the analysis of the nature and social impact of technology. And then he kind of called for the use of ethics for the corresponding formulation of policies that will regulate how technology is used. And this is a very cool paper, by the way. It's only 6 pages long, so I strongly recommend that you read this one if you want. He writes really nicely. But one of the things that he's talking about in the paper is about the syntactic and semantic malleability that computer programs has. So we all know this, right? So computers pretty much, they work with ones and zeros. You can pretty much represent anything with that. And anything can have like many different meanings. And that makes computers extremely powerful, and also like we see like extremely like fast to evolve, right? And this fastness leaves a very large vacuum, right? So like computer programs or practitioners can't keep up. They don't know anymore like what's right, what's wrong, and how to handle all of this uncertainty. So this is where Moore says like we need to use ethics and ethical thinking in order to make these difficult decisions, because all the times we're having new ethical dilemmas because computers just like they move too fast, right? And regulation cannot keep up with that speed. So again, I find it like really interesting that this was already said 40 years ago, and now we're kind of like sort of pretending to have like this discussion for the first time, which is something that I want us also to reflect here, like during the talk, right? So I think like our community moves a lot with hypes, moves a lot with what's like fashionable and new, but I think like it's also like important to recognize things that have been said in the past and to keep consistent at what we consider important, even if it's not fashionable, right? So probably ethics in some years, maybe like it'll stop being fashionable, but I don't think like it'll stop being important. So again, like Moore in this, like in his like paper, he's talking about regulation through ethical reflection about 3 types of invisibility that we have in computational systems. So one of the ones that he's naming is invisible abuse. So that means like computer operations are used for unethical conduct, but because they're not transparent, we cannot see what's unethical, what this unethical conduct is. The other one is invisible programming values, right? So as developers, all humans, we have biases. And of course, we insert our biases in the programs that we make. So he also calls for paying special attention and regulation on that thing. And the other one that he's naming is invisible complex calculations, right? Again, 1985, he's already saying, like programs are so complicated and big that we cannot fully understand what's going on behind them. And again, I find this like super interesting, right? Like again, like he calls them for the policies around these things, because if we look at the AI Act, and I don't know like if there's a Brazilian similar thing to this, but in the European context, so like they put this law trying to regulate AI, and it's exactly around these 3 main things, right? Different words, but it's these 3 main factors that we have, right? And again, like with different names. So if you think invisible abuse, that might be like transparency. Invisible programming values is very related to bias, or like its counterpart, fairness. And invisible complex calculation, I think it's again very related to explainability. So very kind of like contemporary problems already happening in 1985. So what we're doing in our work is we're trying to address this vacuum that as a community we pretty much largely ignored in the last years, and we're taking a lot of like baby steps in this process, right? So I want to like emphasize that we've only started working on this like 5 years ago, and the main goal of our work is to do like a systematic integration of ethical considerations into software development. So like when we're software development teams, they test a lot across like for functionality, but not so much for ethical issues, right? So we often release software without doing any single test about like ethical considerations. And that's why like huge problems then later explode. So we want to avoid this. And in our work, we take a user-centered perspective. So for our work, it's not like developers or policy regulators or researchers that are like the most important. For us, the most important person is the end user, because they're the most affected like by the software. And that makes it like, so we take their ground truth as our moving point. So whatever is concerning the end users is what we consider the most urgent thing. So that's like a distinguishing factor. And we've kind of focused on 3 main things. So the first one, when we started working around this, is we didn't really know which ethical issues were important for end users, which ones were more prevalent, which ones were more urgent. So we tried to understand a little bit about that panorama and the prevalence. Then we tried to understand like development teams and how they make decisions about ethical issues, and maybe where they might need support in order to address ethical issues. And then in the third step, what we've been doing is developing tools for supporting developers in order to make ethical decisions. And I'm going to be talking, again, not full-blown, but a little bit about each of these 3 steps. And again, feel free to ask questions about any of them as we go through the talk. So let me go a little bit into the first one. So we looked into what we call ethical concerns. So worries about ethical issues from traditional end users, marginalized end users, and intersectional users. So users that come from 2 or more marginalized communities and seeing like the effect of like the concerns on them. We've looked at reports on different channels, and by channels, pretty much we've looked at App Store reviews and Reddit posts, and we've looked at multiple and single ethical issues. So sometimes we look like, okay, what are like, in a wide range, what are people talking about that's related to ethical issues, and sometimes we really dig into specific ones. So for example, accountability, discrimination, cyberbullying, and then try to classify and like dissect like very specific ones. So when we started this work, this was the first taxonomy that we made. So there was already a taxonomy from 2010 that tried to classify ethical issues in technology. And as you can imagine, so ethical issues emerge as technologies also like evolves, right? So it was a little bit outdated. And again, it didn't have this perspective for end users, but it was pretty helpful. So we took that and we modified it according to what we saw that people were talking about. So sometimes we merge categories. So the original category, for example, had tons of categories about privacy. And in reality, users didn't distinguish into all those different categories of privacy. So we just took one. Or there was others that weren't in the original one. So for example, addiction that was mentioned here, or censorship, or harmful advertisement, inappropriate content, misinformation, abuse, fraud, manipulation, disruption. Those were all new things that emerged that you can say in the last 15 years, they become like a large issue for end users, right? And you can see like, so even in between, so this 2024, 2023, 25, like things have changed even in our own work. So we see issues that arise or become more prevalent, even like if the time span is quite short. Yeah.
Good question. Where would the way AI, sorry, where would the way models such as ChatGPT have been trained? Where would that fit? Is that content theft?
So trained, yes. If it's the content, yes, but it can also be. So we have. It used to be discrimination, and now it's called. I learned the new one. Let me see. Disparity. So if it's biased data, so it depends what issue you're pointing at, right? So if it's like biased data, then it's disparity. If it's like that they're using it without your permission, then it comes here in fraud.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. So I want to give you a couple of examples of this end user report, right? Because it could be like very abstract, like what are you talking about? What is this censorship? What is this misinformation? And this is what some of the comments that we got from reviewers in their initial submissions. It was like, the data can't be that rich. People don't know what they're talking about. And we found, again, like I have very brief examples, but there's pretty extensive and people that know quite a lot when they're reporting ethical issues in software. So like, for example, this is one about TikTok on content theft, full of stolen content that the creators worked for. Or another one, there's still a lot of hate, etc. on there. It's sad that you don't care about bullies. This is cyberbullying on Instagram. Racist and discriminated. They have proven that TikTok suppresses Black Lives Matter, disabled, poor, and anyone that's not conventionally attractive. This is disparity on TikTok. Imagine wasting power and contributing to carbon emission at such scale where Facebook can avoid this just by introducing setting to invert colors. This is sustainability on Facebook. The amount of privacy you need to give up to have this overhyped egg timer in your house is ridiculous. This is privacy on Alexa. Amazing app. It is my teacher, but it just only one minor YouTube problem that fake news is more than real news. This is misinformation on YouTube. So again, like we analyze this type of information, like this type of posts from different people, and these are like App Store reviews posts. So like Reddit posts tend to be a lot longer. And in the first iteration, we collected around 6 million reviews. We manually annotated around 3,000 because it was the first time that we really wanted to build this taxonomy. So we needed a lot of information. And then we automatically, like with those 3,000 that we labeled, we trained classifiers. So this was before LLMs existed. And I'm going to talk about a little bit the work that we've done now that LLMs have really helped us, right? We train our classifiers for filtering and then classifying into different like taxonomies that we have. And then we use topic modeling on top of like sometimes the general, on top of the specific like categories that we had to detect themes that we had. So for example, privacy surveillance is a theme, right? Or we have one like, okay, like distribution of my information without my consent. That's another theme that you can have there. And here are some of the things that I would like to share that we found there. So first, data like about ethical issues was pretty sparse. In this, it's not sparse anymore, but this study was 2022. It was pretty sparse back then. So in order to kind of like make our study more focused, we used keywords. So that was kind of cheating in a way, right? So we had like around 4 to 5% of the whole data without keywords contain ethical issues. And then like, so we saw like discrimination, inappropriate content, accountability, privacy, censorship, and scam for our top 5 concerns that we had back then. And then like, so we reran this study now using LLMs, and LLMs are pretty cool now because we didn't need the keywords. So we could use the examples that we had from our previous data set, right? So we needed to like just give 5 examples of each category, and we got unbelievable results. So it was like around 90% accuracy for our new models. And then this was data that was like around 4 years later, and it was really surprising. We saw the same top 5 concerns, but just different order. But we're not looking, so we have the same apps, but we're not only looking at those. So this data set is much larger. So in the other one, I think we had 10 apps. Here we have 50, right? But again, very telling. The concerns that people had were pretty much the same in the top 5. So we also saw, not surprisingly, some apps had like huge ethical issues or ethical concerns, others had less. In our data set, and this is the first like study that we did, we had TikTok, Uber, and Facebook were the ones that people had like were complaining about the most. And of course, like among the different apps, people had different concerns, right? So that again, that's not very surprising because all of them had quite different functionality. So some had like discrimination was the main thing, or privacy, accountability. So again, that varied through the apps. So another important or interesting thing that we found was that they had significantly lower ratings than apps that were not speaking about ethical reviews. They were more upvoted, so that means that people were sharing the same opinion that the person that was writing the review there, and they were way lengthier than the other reviews that were just about speaking about a bug report or general praise or a general complaint.
Wait, sorry,
Yes.
I don't understand the very high rating for addiction there.
Oh,
What does that mean?
so this was like, this was also, yes. So the question is, sorry, the question is, why is addiction so high? You know, like if it's an ethical concern. And this had to do, so there were a lot of people saying like, oh my God, this app is so cool. I haven't done anything in the last week because I'm just glued into this app. So the person was not exactly complaining, but we decided to label this as an ethical issue. And that's why that one was like kind of very special in that way, but we kind of felt like this is detrimental to the person, and they're kind of saying like they haven't done anything else. And there were so many like these.
But how do you draw the line? Because, you know, I can say the app is very cool. And that's one thing. Another thing is this may be bad for you, even though you like it. How do you decide which is which?
Yeah. So I think like honestly, like so for the others, we always took users' ground truth as the truth. You know, like so whatever they report, it could be, and this is always like an argument the developers kind of say like users don't know. So maybe for like accessibility. So they're like, that feature is fine. The user just doesn't know how to use it, or they could increase the font, or they could do this or that. But we didn't go and delve, is the user right or not? We assume if the user is reporting that, that means like the app is insufficient. But for addiction, we did take a different approach. Like, and I do think it might be a weakness of the work that we did take our own interpretation. So even if people were happy with using it nonstop, kind of like, and I can't stop using it, I don't communicate with friends and family, this is so cool, we still labeled it as addiction. We did have some of people kind of having a negative sentiment to it,
okay,
but it's not consistent, if I'm true. So that was something, you know, like that I think maybe we should have approached differently, but
okay,
we didn't on that one.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a comment about that some of these hypotheses like the awareness of the subject, not about the software itself, because users might not be aware that I can complain about something. Like the population of users in one software and the other, I'm not sure if I can compare them. They are not the same somehow. Because I might be a user of Uber, for example, but maybe my father does uses Uber also, and doesn't know that things can be complained about. maybe some of it out, not the addition.
So the question, like, if I'm repeating, your question is like how I think, or like how our research shows, like what is the impact of awareness on the reports of ethical issues, right? So I think this is like, I mean, there's a huge impact. You cannot report on something that you're not aware of, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit later. So we see like an upgrowing trend of like reports of ethical issues, but even ourselves, I think like we're becoming more and more aware, and also like our friends. So I get a lot more questions of friends now about like, oh, privacy, or like, oh, bias, like even like general people are much more aware, and this has to do with the media. So the media is talking a lot more about these issues, and then we know more, or we dig in more. But of course, like, yes, like this is like directly reflected there. So you cannot report on anything that you don't know about. Okay, so we also, like the previous work I was looking at, we pretty much what we were doing is we were mining data, right? So that people, so it was like implicit feedback of people that write, like again, Reddit posts or App Store reviews. But I'm going to ask you, who has written an App Store review? Here. App Store review.
App Store.
App Store.
Apple.
Yes, Apple or Google Play. Okay, so we have quite a, like some. Who has written a Reddit post? Okay, so we see like it's kind of a selective audience. Even here, it's not like all of us are writing. I've never written one, even if this is like my research area. I'm always surprised. In Germany, a lot of hands. People like to write and complain. Sort of like, so it depends on the population. But my point is like, not everybody does this. And actually there's work looking at who writes reviews, who like, you know, like, and they found like most people are middle-aged white men that are writing here. No offense, like Fernando. Like, but it was like, okay, so it was a nice starting point, but we want to be more inclusive and figure out what other people that might not necessarily have the time or the inclination to do this are thinking about software and their ethical issues. So for this, we did a survey, like, and it was really like everybody could answer this survey. So it was quite nice. Like as a researcher that you say like, oh, like for the distribution, and we were interested in what worried users, but then we were also interested like where do users draw the line? And that was kind of a reflection that we were having, like, again, like there seems to be an increased consciousness of where technology is lacking, right? And like people that are specialized in computer science, but also in the general population. And there was this question, why do we keep on using this? Why do we keep on putting up with things that we think are wrong? And what needs to happen, sort of like that we stop using it, or that we change, or that we invite our friends or family to use it. So this study was a little bit about exploring those two sides. So like the ethical issues, and there again, we found some, so misinformation was a new one. It didn't appear in our previous studies, but again, like you see, as stuff becomes large, so this was after the Trump election, right? So people were like, oh, this is a thing. Like COVID had already happened. It was like, this is like technology, like, and it became like there you see it prevalent. So we had privacy, scam, and misinformation as a top 3. And what we did here is we made scenarios for the concerns, right? And we presented the people like the different scenarios, so 3 different scenarios for their 3 main concerns. And we asked people, what would you do about that? And we gave them like 3 main options. So it was do nothing, stop using the software, encouraging friends and family to stop using the software, contact the company, or contact law enforcement. And they could click and as many as they wanted, right? So it was not exclusive, right? But you see kind of like there's an escalation there. And we found that the ethical issue that prompted like the faster or stronger reaction, so we assigned sort of scores like to the actions, right? So with do nothing was the like less, and contacting law enforcement was like the highest. And then we added sort of like whatever they had there. We found that so scam was the one that prompted the strongest reactions. So people were very much like kind of like, if I'm losing money, I'm gonna do something about it. I will be upset. Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I like video games. One of these days I was trying to play a golf video game. It's the only sport I like. And the game required me to create an account. And I was very angry at it. My parents were worried about me. So angry I was. Where would that fit?
Manipulative design.
Okay.
They're manipulating you, right? Like they're not transparent about what they want. And it's mixed. And I'm going to talk a little bit with accountability. They don't allow you. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Like, yeah. Yeah. And then like the one that was like so scam was the one that like elicited like the strongest reactions, and quite sad was now it's called disparity, but this discrimination one was the one that had the lowest. And I think again like had to do like with a flaw probably in our design. So for the scam we kind of used like you lose your money, so it was like personal. And then the other one, if you didn't belong, so it was like about vulnerable populations like being affected by the software or like having this inequality. I think like our assumption was if people didn't belong to these groups, they care less. So they saw like, okay, I'm not that affected. And that's why you see this as the one that really like that difference is significant. The same happens with the scam. Okay, so just a little bit. So like we've also done research on minoritized and intersectional groups, and there we found, so they share two concerns that also traditional users have, which is like discrimination and misinformation that's happening over there, but all of the others are quite different, right? So we see like other concerns that weren't as prevalent, like here they're a huge thing, and others and in the with the traditional users it was a huge thing. Here they're much less. So this calls again like we need to kind of take special attention like at looking at these vulnerable groups when like making ethical decisions, because they do have different experiences and different needs when it comes to software. And then like yes, to the previous one.
There's a paper about students, CS students from marginal groups. They tended to enroll more in ethics related courses than students of the majority.
Yes, and we're going to see this in the results that I have about the development teams who advocate for ethics and all this stuff. Very similar results to this one. Yeah. So we did a similar thing. So right, like with older populations. So here we interviewed 19 older adults from 65 to 90 years old about their ethical concerns in software. And again, with intention, like generally as like a community, we don't focus that much about them. And we were interested on their opinions and their experiences. And here we focused specifically on social media, because with preliminary interviews, we found out that that was the types of apps that they use the most. And we got some pretty cool results. So first, people knew quite a lot. And okay, maybe that was our population, like, or something, but they were quite well informed. And again, the concerns that they had were different from the majority. So some shared, but some very specific to them. So like their main concerns were privacy, transparency, and then they had inappropriate content, and then they had scam, but the stories they had from scam were quite different from the ones that you have from traditional users. So here you really kind of reflect, like it's a reflection of like this vulnerability that they have, that they're really being explicitly targeted. And there were like a lot of like stories about that. And then addiction was also one that was prevalent, but for that one, they were not so concerned about themselves, but about younger generations. So again, like important to always elicit requirements from diverse populations when looking into ethical issues. Then a little bit like I've already a bit mentioned this, but they're on the rise. So ethical concerns. So we see like really a growth on the discussions and everything. And I think it's very related to your point, like there's higher awareness. And we also see peaks when there's like world events that are highly publicized in the media. So some examples, for example, Cambridge Analytica, huge peak, like because we also looked at historical data. Mark Zuckerberg testifies in Congress, huge peak. BLM protests, so Black Lives Matters protests in the US, a big peak. Twitter bans Donald Trump, another peak. Like the Capitol inauguration, another peak. When Elon Musk got Twitter, another one, right? So we see like again like these world events, they're reported, they create more awareness, people write more about them. So we've also looked into like prioritizing not requirements, but this ethical issues. And here we were looking at data that was from the intersectional communities, and we made like an algorithm or an approach that took recency, popularity, negative sentiment, and then what we consider like, so we had models for classifying harm, negativity, that's kind of like a type of toxicity, and then in this case it was vulnerable populations, but we took only children there, right? So I think this is a drawback from this model, that there should be other groups in that one. And they're like, again, like this approach works for individual posts. So for example, if there's a post of someone saying like being bullied and kind of saying like, I will like kill myself, like, so you know, like if you don't like, if this doesn't stop or something, so this would be classified as like very urgent, something that needs like immediate attention, compared to a cyberbullying one that's about like, I don't know, I'm getting negative comments but not like promising to do like self-harm. And we did it like for individual posts and also for the overall ethical issues. That went with the idea to help development teams prioritize which ones they should address faster. So other interesting things that we've seen that I've already kind of mentioned is like in all of this work is that ethical issues are very commonly intertwined, right? So they're related. So like they very rarely exist in isolation. So like the underlying causes, so and this is like what's happening in the first image. So sometimes the underlying cause for two ethical issues is exactly the same. And sometimes people report one ethical issue, let's say privacy, but it's very related, for example, to transparency. So that kind of like, that's an invitation probably that when we look at ethical issues, probably we need to take a more holistic approach and not just focus on one, like which has been commonly done in the literature. So for example, people tend to focus a lot on privacy, on accessibility, like kind of like on security. So very specific ones, but maybe we need to like take like again like a little bit, at least an overview of the how they're related to each other. And with this idea in mind, we started, and this is very much work in progress, as you see from the image, but to construct a knowledge graph of ethical issues and how they're connected with each other. And also like connected, but from the different applications, how they evolve through the different domains, how like are the stances and everything. And it's like quite messy, like in a way, so I don't think like we can see much, but maybe like a cool direction to go. So we hope also to use this knowledge graph for classification. So like of the stances and of the ethical issues also. Any questions so far?
Are you gonna provide answers to that, or just link and go in your course?
Which one?
Which course?
Yes, which course? I'm like, I'm already enrolling you here.
This is like I have some discussions like where to put this as a framework for decisions to support developers. Is this part of our discussions?
Yes.
So when you have a certain feature, they get to the site.
So I
you have a I would say recommendation for.
So the question, where should this be placed? Sort of like in the software development kind of.
Yeah.
So we envision this kind of like as auditing tools. You know, like as we audit ourselves for other stuff, like then you audit yourself for the ethics of your software product, and it should be running constantly.
But if
and
you're talking about software, auditing the software that's already.
Yes.
Right, but I'm talking about the software development process to avoid like ethical issues and the software solution.
So I think for this, like again, like the knowledge graph could be useful because you already know sort of like I want to develop a software sort of like that's in this domain. So then you could look at that one, right? Like and kind of see like what are the common ethical issues that people are reporting there.
Example, right?
Yeah.
Not don't do this.
Yeah. Okay, then I want to tell you a little bit about development teams, right? So development teams are part of a culture that sort of like causes or like where these ethical issues are produced. And when we were looking at this, we looked at three different things. So the first one that we started was whistleblowing. So we were very interested in whistleblowing. We have Snowden, we have like very Francis Bacon, very prominent cases, right? Of people that sort of like denounce their companies and then face like terrible consequences, right? So we were like, oh, maybe people are deterred from sort of like calling out in their own companies. They might not be like these public figures, but because they see all of these highly publicized examples in the media, right? So we were very interested in seeing like the level of support that whistleblowers, these well-known whistleblowers had, and then what we called, so like in order to bias people less, reporting wrongdoing. So like how willing people were to report wrongdoing in their software companies when they noticed like stuff. Then we looked at ethical decision making, and then we looked at how identity shapes ethical advocacy, and that's very related, like to what you were mentioning with the students. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on the first two, but I will go a little bit, just 1 or 2 slides in the identity thing. So like, again, in the whistleblowing, so we found that people, around 35% were aware of legislation that protects whistleblowers. And these were all practitioners, software practitioners. I thought that was pretty good. I didn't expect this. I myself didn't know this before I started working like on this topic. Then around 92% thought it was in the company's first good interest that they spoke up. So again, like really encouraging. Then, I think this was like in their own, I forgot this because I don't have my notes, but here it's in the interest of the company. And I think here it's like they will be willing to speak up. And the other one, it's in the interest of the company to speak up. Yes. And then they like 87% felt personally obliged to speak up. So again, like really good.
Quick one. How many people?
145. Wow. For this one. And then like, so when we asked them like, okay, what are the most effective ways? So then like people were like, oh, to report immediately in their organization, directly confronting the wrongdoer, or formally reporting wrongdoing outside of the organization. So like, again, like this were like pretty kind of like expected, but then we had kind of like, okay, when you notice like the very positive results that we had at the beginning. So we had 22% of the people had witnessed or suspected wrongdoing in their current organization. So only the one that had been recently working on, and only 48% had taken action, 52% did not, right? So like, again, like less encouraging than what the other things that we asked at the beginning. And when we were asking them why, sort of for the people that did not take action, 33% thought that the breach was not this serious, 27% didn't think that the organization would do anything about it, 18% feel retaliation, and 50% did not know where to report or what to do, you know, like how to handle the issue. And then like maybe this like a little like a positive note, right? For the people that did report, 42% did result in like an action for what they were like reporting.
But that's like 42% of
the
less than 50%.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Then we had another, so that was one study, right? And that was really focused on reporting wrongdoing. And then we were interested in like, how do people make these decisions? How do they discuss? Like, you know, like how difficult is it? Like, how do teams like, so I had heard from people again in the industry kind of like, oh, I sometimes report, but then I become the bad person in my team that's always slowing people down or stuff like this. So we were really interested in like hearing more about this experiences. So we ran another survey. I think this one has around 175 like participants, and this one again, this numbers were higher. So here 60% of the people have encountered ethical issues, and it's really in their software, so it's not in their workplace. So for example, harassment or, you know, like discrimination, those don't count. So it's really things that are like in the programs they develop. And 90% chose not to intervene, and 15% were not allowed to intervene. So they did try and then they were blocked. So other important things that we found here, so 80, and this is kind of a reflection again, oh, it's 1898 that we like surveyed, that we found here is like, and it mirrors a little bit like what we saw before. People do consider, the overall majority do consider ethical issues like as an important thing. And then we see like 50% as very important, 35% as somewhat important. So there's degrees there. And then we see like a really interesting like pattern. Like people in the global south consider ethical issues much more important than people in the global north. Like, and this is like with a statistical significant difference. This was such a surprising like result, like living in Europe and like coming from Mexico. Like this one was not something I expected. And we really see like, and this is, America has a peak, but like, so like Canada and the US are like in the global north, and we really see, so who is pushing? It's us. So it's Latin America that's very concerned about ethical issues.
Yeah,
yes.
I was going to ask, what is America? The continent, you mean?
Yes, America is the continent. Yeah, so like, yeah. And then like, we saw like a similar thing. And then let me shout out also to the Africans, right? Like, so also like, they're like very like, kind of considering like, it's very important, like with the time that they invested in addressing or trying to solve ethical issues in their software. So again, we saw global south and Africa investing much more time than the global north and, for example, Europe. So key drivers. So like the key drivers that why people thought it was important to address were law. So people were really scared of like fines and like like not like going to court, stuff like this, company policies and personal values. And there was less emphasis on users or team values. So I've already, I think, like sort of mentioned this, but we saw the same thing with Global South, also with women and people working in nonprofits. So we also had not only people that work like in corporations, but also nonprofits. They also spend more time addressing like ethical issues. So when we kind of asked or looked into like what were the challenges that people had or development teams had, the largest one was conflicting business goals, which is not a surprise. Then it was like lack of awareness either of the team or of themselves, so they didn't know how to solve the issue, or like we're unconvinced, is it an issue at all? Is it big enough? Like, what do I do? And 32% didn't have the time to solve it. And then like here, even if we saw like people again, like in the Global South, kind of saying like, this is important, we invest a lot of time, they reported the most difficulties speaking up and addressing it in their teams. Like again, like compared to the Global North. So, and then like just to say a little bit about the ethical advocacy paper. So here we found, again, like marginalized practitioners had a lot more awareness, like a heightened sensitivity, and they demonstrated more empowerment. So this contradicts our previous results, and I want to say a little bit of a word about that to address them, right? And here with marginalized groups, we included women, people of color, Global South, and disabled individuals. And again, we saw the same thing. People need support for addressing ethical issues. And I mean, we see this great disparity, and it has to do a lot with the populations. So in this survey, we had, I think it's the first study that we do that we had like such a large number of respondents from Africa. And African respondents like really reported like a high level of confidence discussing ethical issues in their teams, things like this that didn't happen, for example, in Latin America. So because they were like a larger group think, I think this is why we see like here they're not struggling to speak up that we do see in the previous survey. Yes?
Sub-Saharan or Saharian or?
They were South African, most of them.
Okay.
In this one. Okay. So it was really interesting. We tried to like make an interpretation why this happened, like discussing with a researcher that like comes from there. And they were kind of like, so I think they have an Ubuntu culture where they kind of like go a lot with collectivist like thing, and they reach a consensus before making a decision. And again, I've never worked there, I don't know, like, but it could be a reason sort of like of why this is happening.
Is the person with whom you discussed part of a minoritized group or something?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So other interesting things about this identity and ethical advocacy paper is like only 29% of the people consider that their political views affect how they prioritize ethical issues, and even less. So it's like 52%, 49% strongly disagree that their identity shapes how they prioritize ethical issues. So we were like also like quite surprised with these results. Yes.
We can discuss there about this. There is an article, I guess we're in the session in
On which one?
Fire in the workshop.
Probably, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'll send you the email anyways.
Okay.
Developers belong to.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So one of the kind of common themes that we saw in the 3 kind of surveys that we did again with different populations, sort of looking at different aspects, is developers do need support. And we've also seen this a lot. So I teach an ethics and privacy course. And we see like people kind of report like, I want to train how to have these difficult discussions. I want to train how to think about ethical issues. So there's kind of like, and I thought also myself, when I was starting to teach this, I was like, I have no idea how to think about this thing. So it was so difficult even like to train myself. And I think because we're so used to kind of, well, computing, sort of like it's efficient, it's not efficient, it's this, it's that, right? So it's like true, false, kind of like in this mode. And when it becomes like less clear, we have a lot of difficulties, and we have a lot of difficulties like reaching arguments. So now like we have focused, like our most recent work has focused on making tools that help developers practice having these like difficult conversations. And one of the first tools that we did is called like ethical virtual advocate, and it does exactly that. So you give it's an LLM power tool. So you give the tool your ethical dilemma. You know, like I'm in charge of making a tool or make of an app that has like heavy privacy breaches. You know, and then like you're trying to like simulate a conversation, and you can put there how your manager is. So it's kind of simulating or assuming you're speaking to your manager, and it gives 3 types of manager and then like the level of difficulty. And the tool is trained, so like it shows you different like argumentation styles that come from the literature. So kind of like with literature, like how to win arguments. And let me show you. So like, for example, this is like the types. So this is like, I'm concerned about collecting unnecessary user data, right? And then you see the manager type. So you have the capitalist, right? So always chasing profit. The deluder, that's not an issue. Come on, let's just go ahead and do it. And the cynical, that rationalizes like the issue as a norm, with a focus on reaching the stakeholders' goal. And then you can also put the difficulty level of your manager, right? So how much he's going to oppose or like to your idea or not. So I find it like quite nice. And again, the arguments, you don't write your own arguments, but they are given to you. And again, like, let me see if I have this. Yeah, so you see here, like these are just a couple logical fallacies, software system, rhetorical strategy. So you get a feel, again, through the conversation, what's working, what's not working, and then you get feedback, right? So it kind of tells you, because we all have our styles, and sometimes we overuse one that might not be so efficient. So the tool kind of notes that and says, like, you might want to try here software systems. Don't go all the time, like, fighting hard if you're having this type of person there. Or like, so it tells you, it gives you feedback and tells you how to improve. And you get like a little score. So like here you see like, okay, it tells you like the strengths, areas for improvement, the reasoning process. So it tells you sort of like, okay, you use this fallacy, like this rhetorical strategies, why it's a good idea, why it might be better to use this or that one, and practical advice like for the future. And we evaluated this tool. So it had like 2 rounds of evaluation. At the end, it had like 60 practitioners and people. We had like varying levels. So we thought at the beginning, maybe this is going to be a tool for beginners, and when people that come very experienced, they're going to sort of like laugh at us. But there was high level of engagements, and people did find it, even like the people that were more experienced, useful, and they told us like, I did learn like about the stuff, like the ethical dilemmas that we presented. And another tool that we made like also very recently is one about taking perspectives. And again, this is a phenomenon that we've seen sort of in development teams. So taking the perspective of others is extremely valuable, right? And taking perspective is different from being empathetic, right? So taking the perspective is understanding in some way what the other person is experiencing. And we found like in general, like developers have a hard time doing this. So again, we made an LLM power tool that helps you kind of like with this exercise. And pretty much what you do here, so like this is based on user, like how the tool works right now is with user feedback. So you're presented the user feedback and you're asked to inhabit that reality of the end user. And then like with this, so we call it the perspective coach. So for example, and this is an example like that we use for evaluation, I feel sick. A bunch of guys went live on YouTube and Twitter just to rate and sexualize Muslim girls who had shared eyed photos like we weren't real people. Now girls are locking their accounts and deleting their posts, right? So like it might be very far maybe from the reality of a developer here in Brazil, right? So then you would ask people like, tell us your perspective of what that person is living. And then so like what goes there, right? So like so the developer then kind of like describes that and says like, I feel that the person in this case feels attacked and she feels angry, unsafe, and disrespected. And then the perspective coach tells you like what you can do better, right? So that tells you like you're on the right track, especially in naming how the user feels unsafe and disrespected, a few points for improvement, use your own voice more fully, avoid language that sounds generic or automated, and consider the causes of the emotions that you describe. So again, it gives hints of how to take a more fully and complete perspective of the other person. And we evaluated again this tool. We also evaluated against like a human-to-human interaction, because this is also very valuable, right? But not always to our availability. And they had similar results. So that means like the tool is performing at a similar level to another human that's helping you like to understand their perspective. So we found an increase. People were more willing to question their own decisions, to reconsider new evidence, to value other perspectives, to accept flawed assumptions, to change when contradiction, and enjoy new insights. That one was like the same, like after using the tool a little bit more than one that we're doing before. We also so we had a balanced set of like, and this is by sex because of how we recruited people, so we didn't ask for gender, but males and females. And in general, we found that males did not like to be contradicted. Like, so they really had like a difficulty when you told them like try better, like not that positive, sort of like about that. And yeah, with this, I'm going to close the presentation so that we have a little bit of time for discussions. But I just want to like sort of highlight a few main points, right? So that we shouldn't forget about this talk. The first one is that ethical concerns are there, they're pretty prevalent, and they're on the rise, right? So it is increasing how people are worried about ethical issues in software. The second one is that marginalized communities are affected differently by ethical issues and that we should pay special attention to them. And the third one is that development teams do think that ethical issues are important, but need more support in addressing them. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.